The Cherry Orchard. What if an old movie palace got left behind by time? A modern retelling of Chekhov's The Cherry Orchard. Chapter 1: The Return. The palace had not changed, and that was the first thing everyone said about it. They said it the way you might say a thing about an old relative who was dying, with a warmth that was really a kind of grief, a fondness stretched thin over the fact that nothing about them worked anymore. It hasn't changed at all. As if that were a compliment. As if a building could be praised for refusing to notice that the world outside its doors had moved on without it. It stood on the corner of Delmer and 8th, where it had stood for 91 years. A single-screen movie palace built in an age when people believed that going to see a film should feel like entering a cathedral. The marquee still curved out over the sidewalk on its rusting steel ribs, and the bulbs that outlined it, there had once been 400 of them, still lit at dusk, though nearly a third were dead now, so that the light it threw down onto the pavement came in patches, like a smile with teeth missing. Above the entrance, in letters of chipped gold leaf, the name arched across the stone, the palace, and below that, on the changeable letter board where the current attraction was supposed to be announced, someone had spelled out, weeks ago and never taken down, the words "Thank you for 91 years, with the letter K borrowed from a spare set because they'd run out, so that it read, if you looked closely, THANCU. Nobody had noticed, or everybody had and nobody had said anything, which at the palace amounted to the same thing. Inside, on the morning that Renata Lyubova came home, the lobby smelled of what it had always smelled of. Butter that had gone slightly rancid in the machine overnight, old carpet, the Swedish ghost of 100,000 spilled sodas, soaked so deeply into the floor that it had become part of the building's chemistry, and beneath all of it, faint and constant, the smell of the film itself, of acetate and dust, and the warm electrical smell of a projector that had run so many hours over so many decades that it had cured the air around it like smoke cures a room. Felix smelled it before he saw anyone. He always did. He was 81 years old and mostly deaf in the way that let him hear the things he wanted to hear and none of the things he didn't, and he had worked in the projection booth of the palace for 63 years, since he was 18, and the manager had needed a boy who wouldn't fall asleep during the long reels. He had not fallen asleep. He was not going to start now. He stood at the top of the grand staircase in his cardigan. He wore a cardigan in all seasons, buttoned to the throat, and he listened to the sound of the front doors opening below, the particular double groan of the left door that had needed its hinge oiled for 11 years, and he said, to no one, in the voice of a man announcing a train, "She's here, I said she'd come, didn't I say?" He had not said, but he believed he had, which was very nearly the same thing and had been for some time. Renata came in out of the light and stopped just inside the doors, and for a moment she was only a silhouette, a slim woman in an expensive coat that had been expensive several seasons ago, holding a phone in one hand the way other people hold a cigarette, as something to do with the fingers. She was 48. She had left for Los Angeles 5 years earlier, after the thing with the money and the man and the apartment that had all collapsed together in a single terrible spring, and she had been going to come back the whole time and had never come back, and now she was back, and the reason she was back was the reason nobody was saying out loud yet, which was that the palace was going to be sold, and she was the one whose name was on the deed, and somebody had to decide. But she did not think about that in the first moment. In the first moment she looked at the lobby, at the dead marquee bulbs throwing their broken light through the glass doors behind her, at the carpet with its pattern of gold laurel worn down to the backing, in a river-shaped path from the doors to the concession stand, at the great curved staircase sweeping up to the balcony under a chandelier that had not been fully lit since the 80s, because 6 of its arms were out and nobody could find the parts. And she pressed her hand to her mouth and made a sound that was half a laugh and half something else. "Oh," she said, "oh, look at it, it's exactly the same, it's exactly the same." And she said it as praise. She meant it as praise. She had spent 5 years in a city where everything was new every 18 months, where restaurants she had loved were now other restaurants she was supposed to love, where the ground itself seemed to be on a conveyor belt carrying the past away as fast as it arrived. And she had dreamed of this, of one single place that had simply refused and stayed. She walked into the middle of the lobby and turned slowly around with her arms slightly open, taking it in. And she was crying a little and smiling. And she did not see, because you cannot see the thing you are inside of, that it hasn't changed, was not a description of the building's virtue. It was a description of the building's problem. They came down the stairs to meet her, the whole small, strange household of the place. Leonid came first, her older brother, 60 and soft, a man who had spent his entire adult life at the palace in a role that had never been clearly defined, involving standing near things and having opinions about them. He wore a blazer with a pocket square, and he had, over the years, developed a habit of narrating his own emotions aloud, as though he were the announcer at a sporting event that only he could see. "My sister," he said, coming down with his arms out, his voice thickening. "My sister has come home, look at her. After all this time, I'm not going to make a speech. I promised myself I wouldn't make a speech. I said, Leonid, when she comes, you'll just embrace her, you won't say anything, you'll let the moment," and here his voice broke genuinely, and he had to stop on the third stair from the bottom and take out the pocket square and press it to his eyes. "You'll let the moment be what it is." He blew his nose. "I won't make a speech." He had, of course, just made one. Everybody let him. Behind him came Ani, Renata's adopted daughter, 24, who had run the palace's day-to-day for the last 3 years with the grim competence of someone holding a door shut against a rising tide, and who had the accounts memorized down to the dollar, because she was the only one who ever looked at them. And behind Ani came Vera, Renata's own daughter, 17, home from her last year of school, drifting down the staircase with her phone held up, filming the reunion for reasons she could not have explained, filming it the way she filmed everything, as though a thing had not fully happened until it existed as footage. And down in the lobby, hanging back near the concession stand where he felt most comfortable because it was the part of the building that made money, stood a man they had not expected. Or rather, a man they had expected but had hoped, in the way of that household, to expect a little later. His name was Dayan Laperv, and he owned 4 things on that block already, and he had come to talk to Renata about a 5th. Dayan was 39 and had grown up in the neighborhood, and there was not a person in that lobby who did not remember his father, who had swept the floors of the palace on the late shift for years, and who had brought Dayan with him sometimes when there was no one to watch the boy, so that some of Dayan's earliest memories were of sitting in the dark of the empty theater at 2 in the morning, in a velvet seat that swallowed him whole, watching his father push a broom down the sloping aisle in the light thrown by the exit signs. He had done well. He had done, by the measure of the block, extraordinarily well. He owned the parking structure, the 2 buildings that had been a hardware store and were now apartments above a coffee place, and the lot on the corner that everyone still called the old bank, though the bank had been gone for 20 years. He wore good clothes without seeming to think about them, and he had a way of standing very still and listening that made people trust him and also, obscurely, made them nervous, because he was clearly adding something up while he listened, and you could not tell what. When Renata saw him, she gave a small cry of real delight, because she had known him as a child and was fond of him, and she crossed the lobby and took both his hands. "Dayan Laperv, little Dayan, look at you, look at the suit on you. Ms. Lyubova." He let her hold his hands and he smiled, and the smile was warm and it was real, and underneath the warmth, running quietly beneath it the whole time like current under still water, was the reason he had come. "Welcome home. It's good you're back. There are things we should talk about, when you're ready, not today." "Not today," Leonid agreed grandly from the stairs. "Today is for feeling. Today is not a business day. Today the palace has its heart back." Dayan looked at Leonid for a moment, with an expression of great patience. "Sure," he said, "not today." That night they had a kind of party, though nobody called it that, because you do not throw a party for a funeral, and everybody in the building knew, at some level below the level where they let themselves know it, that this was closer to a funeral than to a homecoming. They ran a film. Of course they ran a film. It was the only thing the building knew how to do to celebrate itself. Felix climbed the narrow iron stairs to the booth, refusing help, refusing it with a savagery that frightened Vera, and he threaded the projector with his old hands that shook everywhere, except when they were doing this one thing they had done 10,000 times, and he ran a print of a film from 1958 that the palace had shown on its opening anniversary night for as long as anyone could remember. The print was scratched to ruin. It rained on the screen, that soft vertical drizzle of accumulated damage that old prints get, and the sound crackled, and in the middle of the second reel, there was a splice so old and so many times repaired that the image jumped, and a full second of the film was simply gone, and everyone in the theater who had grown up there mouthed the missing line along with the gap out of pure memory, because they knew where it was. They had always known where it was. The wound in the film was as familiar to them as a scar on their own hand. Renata sat in the middle of the empty theater, one woman in a house built for 1100, and watched the rain fall on the screen and felt her heart break open with love, and she leaned over to Annie and whispered, "It's perfect. Isn't it perfect? That it's exactly the same." And Annie, who had spent the afternoon on the phone with the man from the bank, and who knew to the dollar how much the building owed and to the day how long they had, said nothing. She looked at the screen where the rain fell, and she looked at the empty rows around her, 1100 seats and 4 people in them, and she thought about the property tax notice in the drawer of the office desk, and the balloon payment on the mortgage her mother had taken against the building in the terrible spring 5 years ago and had never once mentioned since. And she did not say it's perfect, and she did not say it's the same, and she did not say the thing she wanted to say, which was, "That's the problem, Mama. That's the whole entire problem. It's exactly the same and the world is not, and one of those two things is going to have to give, and it isn't going to be the world." She let her mother watch the rain. Some grief you can only put off. You cannot cancel it, but you can, if you love someone, let them have one more night before it comes. Chapter 2: The Offer. Dayan came back 3 days later with a folder, and the folder was the thing that changed the weather in the building, because up until the folder everything had been feeling, and the folder was arithmetic. He laid it on the desk in the cramped office behind the concession stand, the office where 60 years of paper had accumulated in strata like rock, and he opened it, and he did the thing that he had practiced doing gently, because he genuinely did not want to be cruel about it, and he genuinely was going to say it anyway. "I want to be straight with you," he said, "because everybody else in your life is going to be soft with you, and soft is going to cost you the building. So, here it is." Renata sat behind the desk with Leonid standing at her shoulder and Annie in the doorway, and she held her phone in both hands in her lap and looked at Dayan the way you look at a doctor who has asked you to sit down. "The tax reassessment came through," Dayan said. "The whole corridor got reassessed when the light rail line got approved. Your land, not the building, the land the building is sitting on, is worth about 11 times what it was worth when your father ran this place, which is wonderful, which means you're rich, on paper." He let that sit. "It also means your property taxes went up by a factor of about 6, and they're due in November, and they are more than this theater has cleared in profit in any single year since I was in high school. And that's before the mortgage payment," which he glanced at Annie, who gave a very small nod, permission, she knows the number, go ahead, which comes due in the spring. "All of it. The balloon, you know the number." "I don't know the number," Renata said pleasantly. "She knows the number," Annie said quietly from the doorway. Renata did not look at her. Dayan leaned forward. "Here's what I'm offering, and I'm offering it because I want you to hear it from someone who loves this block before you hear something worse from someone who doesn't. Sell me the land. Not tomorrow, you've got till the auction. And the auction's set for the spring when the note comes due, so we've got time to do it right. I tear down the theater. I build 80 units of housing, ground floor retail, and listen to me, this part matters. I put a small screening room on the ground floor. 40 seats. I'll call it the Palace. I'll put your father's name on a plaque. You walk away with money instead of debt. The neighborhood gets 80 families who will actually spend money at the coffee place, and the block comes alive and the name survives. That's the deal. It's a good deal. It's the best deal you're going to get, and it's better than the deal the auction gives you, which is nothing, which is worse than nothing. Because at the auction the debt comes off the top, and you could walk away owing money on a building your family owned for 90 years. There was a silence in the little office. Then Leonid laughed. It was a warm laugh, an incredulous, affectionate, worldly laugh, the laugh of a man declining a thing so absurd it hardly bore discussing. "Tear it down," he said. "Tear down the palace. Dayan, my boy, I remember your father with a broom in this very, you want to tear it down and put up apartments. With a, what did you say, a little box with 40 seats and call it the palace." He shook his head, still laughing, and put his hand on his sister's shoulder. "No, no, thank you, but no. Something will come along. Something always comes along. The city has grants for historic buildings. I read about it. There's grants. Isn't there grants, Ani?" "The grants are for stabilization," Ani said. "Roof, facade, seismic. They don't pay the mortgage. They don't pay the taxes. You have to already be solvent to qualify. We don't qualify." "Or a donor," Leonid went on, not hearing her or hearing her the way Felix heard things. "Some rich person who loves old movies. There are people like that. They buy sports teams for a hobby. Why not a theater? Or we do a, what do the young people do, a campaign online, a fund. People give $5. To raise $2.1 million, Ani said. At $5 each, we would need 420,000 people to donate. We sold 91 tickets last week. Total, for the whole week." Leonid waved this away as though it were smoke. "You're always so negative," he said, and he said it fondly, which made it worse. "You get it from the books. Stop looking at the books. Renata, tell her to stop looking at the books. She'll frighten herself." And Renata, and this was the moment Ani would remember, the moment she would come back to again and again in the months after. Renata looked up from her phone and smiled at Dayan, a lovely, warm, grateful smile, and she said, "It's a very kind offer, Dayan. You're a good boy, but you have to understand you can't put a price on it. That's what you're not accounting for. The palace isn't real estate. It's not land." She gestured at the office around them, at the strata of paper, at the water stain on the ceiling shaped like a country nobody had named. "My father proposed to my mother in the balcony of this theater. I learned to walk in that lobby. There's a mark on the door frame of the booth where Felix measured me every summer until I was 15. You want me to sell all of that so you can build parking?" "Not parking," Dayan said. "Homes, 80 homes, families." "You can't put a price on a memory," Renata said gently, as though explaining something to a child, and she picked her phone back up. And Dayan looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face closed, not unkindly. It was the look of a man who has offered someone a rope and watched them explain, sincerely and at length, why they prefer the water. "That's the thing, though, Ms. Lyubova," he said quietly, standing, gathering his folder. "You keep saying you can't put a price on it, but the county did, in November, and the bank did in the spring. Somebody's always putting a price on it. The only question that's ever up to you is whether you're in the room when they do." He put the folder under his arm. "The offer's open," he said, "till the auction. After that, it isn't mine to make any more. After that, it goes to whoever wins the paper, and I promise you they won't put a plaque up." He nodded to Ani in the doorway, one professional to another, the only two people in the building who were looking at the same reality. "Ms. Lyubova, Leonid, I'll see myself out." They heard the left front door give its double groan. the hinge that had needed oil for 11 years, as he went out into the patchy, broken light under the marquee. In the office, Leonid exhaled with enormous relief and clapped his hands once. "Well," he said, "that's settled. God, the nerve, a plaque." He was already halfway to cheerful again. "Who wants lunch? I feel we should celebrate. Renata's home, the palace stands, the barbarians are Vera, put the phone down, come, we'll go to the place with the, is the place still there, the place with the good soup." "The place with the good soup," Ani said from the doorway, in a voice so quiet that only her mother could have heard it if her mother had been listening. "Closed in March." But her mother was not listening. Her mother was looking at her phone, at a photograph she had taken that morning of the marquee against the sky, dead bulbs and all, and she was deciding which filter made the gold of the letters look the way she remembered it, rather than the way it was. Chapter 3: The Anniversary Night. They decided to throw the party after all, and they decided it in the way that household decided everything, which was that no one decided it, and then suddenly it was happening. It began as Leonid's idea, though by the time it took place he had told the story so many times that he had come to believe it was Renata's, and Renata, who liked the idea, did not correct him. The palace was turning 92. 92 was not a number anyone celebrates. It is not 90, not 100. It is the age at which a thing is simply old and everyone is privately counting. But Leonid stood in the lobby one evening and looked up at the chandelier with its 6 dead arms and said, "We should have a night, a proper night, the way we used to. Let the neighborhood see it lit up, remind them what they have." And Ani, standing behind the concession counter with the tablet on which the whole grim arithmetic lived, opened her mouth to say what a night would cost, and looked at her mother's face, which had gone soft and shining at the words "the way we used to," and closed it again. So there was a night. They spent money they did not have. This is worth saying plainly because it is the exact center of the thing, the place where the old play and the new one meet. On the eve of losing everything, they spent money they did not have in order to feel, for a few hours, like people who were not losing everything. Ani watched it go. She watched her mother order a bartender and a case of sparkling wine that was not the cheap kind. She watched Leonid actually put down a deposit on a swing band, 6 pieces, because you can't have a night at the palace without music. The palace was built for music, which was not even true. The palace had been built for silent film and had never in its life contained a swing band, but nobody said so. She watched Vera design and print at a real print shop, 300 invitations on heavy card, gold foil, the palace, 92 years, one more night, and she watched her mother look at the invitations and go still and say, "Why does it say one more night, Vera? That sounds like take that off. Reprint them. It should say something hopeful." And she watched Vera, hurt, reprint 300 invitations at the real print shop, which cost the second amount on top of the first amount. And this time they said 92 years and many more, which was a lie and which everyone preferred. Dayan sent the money. This was the part Ani could not forgive and could not stop being grateful for both at once. When the deposit checks started bouncing, and they bounced quietly one after another, the bartenders, the bands, it was Dayan who covered them without being asked, without announcement. A man paying for the party, celebrating the building he was trying to buy. And when Ani found out and cornered him about it, furious, he only shrugged and said, they were going to have the party either way. Now the band gets paid. I'm not doing it for her. I've got contractors who play in that band. Which was, Ani understood, both true and not the reason. The reason was the boy in the velvet seat at 2 in the morning, watching his father sweep. But Dayan did not say that, and Ani did not make him. The night itself was beautiful, which was the cruelest thing about it. They got the chandelier working. Felix did it. Felix and a rented ladder and a box of bulbs that Ani ordered from a specialty supplier in another state at a price. She entered into the tablet with the feeling of a woman signing something in blood. And for the first time since the 80s, all 6 dead arms came up, and the great glass thing blazed over the staircase. And when it came on the four of them, and the band and the bartender all stopped and looked up at it. And for a moment nobody said anything, and the light came down and made everyone in that lobby 10 years younger, and the carpet whole again, and the gold leaf gold. And Renata put her hand to her mouth and said, "There it is. There it is. That's the palace. That's what I've been trying to tell you it is." And she was right. She was completely right, and she was also standing in the lit ruin of it, holding a glass of wine she could not pay for, and both of those were true, and neither of them canceled the other. The neighborhood came. Not the 420,000 people it would have taken to save the place, the neighborhood, which is to say maybe 70 people, the ones who were left, the ones old enough to remember and the few young enough to think of it as vintage. They came up the swept staircase under the blazing chandelier, and they took photographs. And this was the thing Annie noticed and could not stop noticing all night. They came to photograph it. They stood under the marquee and photographed the letters. They stood on the grand staircase and photographed themselves on it, tagging the location. And the location, when Vera checked, had begun to trend in a small local way. The palace, the old palace, one more night. Look at this place, they don't build them like this anymore. And hundreds of people who would never buy a ticket and had never bought a ticket loved the photographs, loved them. Hearts and hearts and hearts pouring in. So beautiful, this is a crime. Why don't they save places like this? From people who lived 4 blocks away and had not been inside in a decade. Renata drifted through it, all luminous. People she had not seen in years took her hands and said the thing. It hasn't changed. It's exactly the same. And each time they said it, she glowed a little brighter. Because to her, it was the only compliment that mattered. And she did not hear underneath it the low, continuous note that Annie heard all night, which was the sound of people saying goodbye to a thing while telling themselves they were celebrating it. Leonid gave a speech. He had promised he wouldn't. He climbed 3 steps up the grand staircase and tapped a glass and gave a speech about permanence, about how some things stand against the tide, about how in a world that tears everything down and puts up, he actually said it. He said it into a room half of whose guests had come to photograph the teardown they could feel coming. In a world that tears everything down and puts up boxes, the palace stands. And everyone applauded, and Dayan, who was there, who had come in a good jacket and stood near the concession stand where he felt most at home, applauded too, slowly, with a face Annie could not read. And in the middle of it, near midnight, the reckoning arrived the way it always does at these things, quietly, by phone into a pocket, while the band played. Annie felt her tablet buzz. It was an email forwarded from the bank, forwarded twice, the kind of email that has been sitting in someone's outbox waiting for a business day and has finally, indifferently gone out. The auction date was confirmed, not the spring. They had moved it. A backlog cleared, a docket opened, and the sale of the palace, land, building, and all had been set for the 4th of the month. 6 weeks, not spring. 6 weeks. She read it standing behind the concession counter with the chandelier blazing over her, and the band playing something bright, and the sound of 70 people laughing. And she felt the specific vertigo of being the only person in a happy room who has just learned the room is on fire. She found Dayan by the doors. She showed him the screen. He read it and his jaw tightened and he said a short word and then he said, "Okay, okay, that's okay. That actually might help. If she'll take my offer now, I can close a private sale before the auction. And a private sale is worth more to her than the auction floor. And there's still, Annie, there's still a good outcome here, but she has to decide. She has to decide this week. She cannot." He looked out across the lobby at Renata, who was dancing, actually dancing, one hand raised, laughing up at the light. She cannot spend 6 weeks telling people it hasn't changed. Will she talk to me tonight? No, Annie said. Tomorrow. She'll say tomorrow, Annie said. She'll say tomorrow every day until there aren't any more of them. That's not Dayan, that's not her being stupid. She's not stupid. It's that as long as she doesn't decide, it isn't real. The deciding is the part she can't do, because the moment she decides, she's the person who let the palace go instead of the person it happened to. Do you understand? She'd rather it be taken. Being robbed is bearable. Choosing is not. Dayan looked at her for a long moment in the blazing light. "That's the most honest thing anyone said in this building in a month," he said. "Get her to talk to me, please. I've got contractors who need answers, and I've got a boy in me who's 40 years old who can't watch this." And he went out through the left door, which groaned, into the dark under the marquee where every bulb, for one night only, was burning. Chapter 4: The Weeks. They had 6 weeks, and this is the part of the story that has no equivalent in the old play, because in the old play the orchard is sold in a single afternoon offstage at an auction, and the news arrives all at once like weather. But the modern version of losing something slow is not a single afternoon. It is 6 weeks of afternoons, each one of which contains a door that could still be walked through, and is not. Dayan called, he emailed, he came by. Renata was, each time, warm and delighted to see him and entirely unavailable to the reason he had come. She had developed in these weeks a genius for the adjacent conversation. Dayan would come to talk about the private sale, and Renata would want to show him a photograph she had found. A real photograph, printed, of the palace in 1961 with a line around the block. And she would hold it next to her phone, which held a photograph she had taken of the same block that morning, empty, and she would say, "Isn't it strange? Isn't it wonderful that it's the same building, exactly the same? 90 years apart." And Dayan would look at the 2 photographs, the full one and the empty one, and understand that she was looking at the sameness of the building, and he was looking at the difference in the street, and that this was the whole argument, and that it could not be won, because they were not disagreeing about the answer, they were disagreeing about the question. Leonid, meanwhile, pursued rescue. He pursued it with tremendous energy and no method whatsoever. He read an article about a movie palace in another city that had been saved by a nonprofit, and he called the nonprofit. And the nonprofit, kindly, explained that they had raised their money over 4 years with a paid director and a board of local millionaires. And Leonid hung up glowing and told everyone that the nonprofit is very interested, which was not what had been said. He heard about a tax credit and spent a week convinced it would cover everything, and it would have covered, Ani calculated, roughly 4% of everything, and only if they first spent money. They did not have to hire a consultant to file for it. He proposed at various points a documentary crew who would surely pay them for access, a festival that would surely draw crowds, a wealthy collector of film memorabilia whom he was sure he could find whom he never found, and most painfully, a plan whereby a beloved aging film director whom Leonid had met once briefly decades ago would surely, if only Leonid could get a letter to him, step in to save the place out of love for cinema. He wrote the letter. He rewrote it 4 times. He never sent it because he could not find an address he trusted, and he told everyone it was in the director's hands, and it sat in his blazer pocket, softening until the end. None of these things were malicious. This is what Ani kept having to remind herself, standing in the office at night with the tablet, watching the countdown she could not stop the others from ignoring. None of it was laziness or stupidity or cowardice, exactly. It was hope, but hope of a particular ruinous kind, hope untethered from arithmetic, hope as a way of not looking, hope that functioned precisely the way Renata's photographs functioned, to hold up an image of a possible future so that no one had to look at the actual present. Vera, who was 17 and belonged fully to neither camp, did the thing that turned out to matter most, though nobody understood it as help at the time. She made a video. She had been filming all along, the reunion, the party, the chandelier coming on, Felix threading the projector, the empty rows, the water stain shaped like a country nobody had named. And one night, unable to sleep, she cut it together, 3 minutes of it over a piece of music, and she posted it. And it did the thing that things sometimes do. It left the neighborhood entirely. By morning, it had been seen 200,000 times, and by the end of the week over 4 million, and the comments filled with grief from people in countries that had never heard of the street. Save this place. This is heartbreaking. They don't build them anymore. Why is no one saving this? I would give anything to see a film here. And for about 72 hours, The household believed they were saved. Renata wept with joy. Leonid announced definitively that the internet has spoken and that the money will follow the attention. It always does now. This is how it works now, Ani. You see, your negativity was the world is good, the world cares. A fundraiser was set up. And money did come, real money. More money than the palace had seen in years. Strangers from everywhere sending $5, 10. One man in another country sending 500 with a note about his late father and a cinema that no longer existed. It came to $61,000 in 4 days, and it was the most moving thing Ani had ever seen. 4 million people who loved a place they would never stand in. And she sat with the number on the tablet and felt her throat close. And then she did the arithmetic, because she was the only one who ever did, and the arithmetic was this. $61,000 against $2.1 million in debt, and a tax bill and an auction in now under 3 weeks was not a rescue. It was a beautiful, genuine, 4 million person strong wreath. The internet had not come to save the palace. The internet had come to the funeral, and it had brought flowers, and the flowers were real, and the love was real, and it could not, be applied to the note. She had to tell them. That was the worst afternoon. She had to sit her mother and her uncle down in the office under the water stain and explain that 4 million people loving something was not the same as anyone owning it, that attention was not money, that a wave of grief that crested in 72 hours could not carry a debt that took years to make. And she watched her mother's face do something she had never seen it do, which was to understand briefly, fully, before deciding not to. But they love it, Renata said. I know, Mama. 4 million people. They said, one of them said he'd give anything. He gave $500, Ani said, as gently as she has ever said anything. He gave what he could and he meant it, and it was beautiful, and it's still $500. Loving something online is free. That's why 4 million people did it. If it cost what saving it costs, 4,000 would have, and we'd have needed 420,000, and we still would not be enough. And Renata looked at her daughter, and then she picked up her phone, and she opened the video, Vera's video, and she watched the chandelier come on again in it, the 6 dead arms blazing back to life, 4 million times witnessed, and she said in a small voice, not to Ani, not to anyone. But it looks so alive. That was the sentence. Ani would carry that sentence for the rest of her life. But it looks so alive. Her mother, standing 3 weeks from the auction, holding in her hand a glowing rectangle in which the dying building looked completely, gorgeously alive to 4 million witnesses, none of whom would come, and choosing one more time the image over the street. Dayan's offer sat on the desk the whole while, open, patient, worth more than the auction would ever give them, requiring only a signature and a decision. And the decision was the one thing in the world Renata Lyubova could not make, because to sign it was to be the woman who let the palace go, and she would genuinely, to the very end rather, be the woman it was taken from. The auction was set for the 4th. There were 19 days. Chapter 5, the 4th. The auction was not held in the palace, which was its own small cruelty. It was held in a conference room on the 4th floor of the county building, a room with a dropped ceiling and carpet tiles, and a folding table at the front, and the whole apparatus by which a 92-year-old building passes from one set of hands to another turned out to require no ceremony at all, no gavel, no crowd, no drama. A woman from the trustee's office read a case number aloud. There were 4 people in the room who were not staff. It took, from the reading of the number to the confirmation of the sale, a little under 9 minutes. Renata did not go. This was decided again by no one in the way of that household. She woke that morning and said she had a headache, and everyone agreed that she had a headache, and nobody said the true thing, which was that she could not be in a room where the deciding happened to her in real time, that she needed it to happen off stage so that it could arrive as news rather than as an event she had sat through. Leonid went, wearing his good blazer, with the unsent letter to the film director still in the inside pocket, softened now to felt. He went convinced, right up to the reading of the case number, that something would intervene, that this was the moment in the story where the reversal comes, where the phone rings, where the collector appears, where the world proves as good as he had promised Ani it was. He sat in the folding chair with his hands folded and his face open and hopeful, waiting for the rescue. And the rescue did not come, because the rescue never comes, because it was never a story about a rescue. Ani went because someone had to, and because she could not bear for her mother to hear the outcome from a stranger. She sat in the back. Dayan sat near the front. And there was a fourth party. A man in a gray suit representing a company Ani had never heard of. An entity with a name assembled from words that meant nothing, capital and holdings and a Roman numeral. The kind of name behind which there is no boy in a velvet seat, no father with a broom, no memory of any kind, only a spreadsheet in another city with a line item for the corner of Delmer and 8th. And they bid. That was the part Ani had not braced for, that there would be a contest at all, that the building would be fought over in its last 9 minutes when no one had fought for it in years. The man in the gray suit bid. Dayan bid. The number climbed, past the debt, past the number Dayan had offered Renata privately weeks ago. The offer she could have simply signed, past it, and Ani sat in the back and did the terrible arithmetic in real time and understood what was happening. Her mother, by refusing to choose, had cost herself nothing and Dayan everything. The private sale would have closed clean at the lower number, and Renata would have walked away with money. Instead, the auction had done what auctions do, found the ceiling. And the ceiling was high because 2 men wanted the corner, and every dollar above the debt now went not to Renata. She had lost at the moment the note called, but simply up, into the machinery, proving one last time the thing Dayan had said in the office weeks ago. Somebody's always putting a price on it. The only question is whether you're in the room. Renata had not been in the room, and so the price had been put on it by a man in a gray suit and a man who had once swept its floors as a child. And neither of those 2 men was named Lyubova, and that was the whole 92 years, decided in 9 minutes, in a room with a dropped ceiling, while the person it belonged to lay at home with a headache that was not a headache, waiting for it to become news. Dayan won. He won it at a number that hurt him, a number well past sense, a number he would spend years explaining to his own accountant. And when the woman from the trustee's office confirmed the sale and wrote it down and moved on to the next case number without pause, the palace already gone, already yesterday's item, the room already onto a foreclosed duplex on the other side of town, Dayan sat very still for a moment with his hands flat on his knees. And Leonid, in the folding chair, finally understood that the rescue was not coming, and he took out the letter to the film director, the softened felt of it, and he looked at it, and he put it back, and he began, silently, to cry in the county building, in his good blazer, an old man who had promised his sister that something would come along because something always comes along, learning in a drop-ceiling room that this had never once in the history of the world been true. Dayan found Ani in the hallway afterward by the elevators. Neither of them said anything for a while. Then he said, "I paid 400,000 more than I needed to. If she'd signed in March, she'd have money right now and I'd have the building for less and everybody would have been." He stopped. "I'm not angry. I want to be angry and I can't get there. She didn't do it to me. She just couldn't." He pressed the heel of his hand to his eye once hard. "I used to sit in that theater at 2 in the morning while my dad swept. Did you know that? He'd bring me because there was nobody to watch me. I'd sit in the dark in a seat too big for me and watch him push that broom down the aisle in the light off the exit signs. And I thought, I was a kid, I thought he owned it. I thought my dad owned the most beautiful building in the world. And I just bought it. I just bought the most beautiful building in the world and I'm going to tear it down because there is no version of the arithmetic where I don't. And I've done the arithmetic more times than you have, and there isn't one." He looked at Ani. "Tell your mother no. Don't tell her anything from me. I'll come Sunday. I'll tell her myself. She deserves to hear it from somebody who," he searched for the word, from somebody it also costs. He got in the elevator. The doors closed on him, and Ani stood in the hallway of the county building, 24 years old, holding a tablet with a number on it that no longer mattered, and understood that the person who had loved the palace enough to overpay for its corpse was the same person who was going to demolish it, and that this was not a contradiction, and that her mother would never in her life understand that it was not a contradiction. Chapter 6, Sunday. Dayan came on Sunday as he'd said he would, and he told them himself in the lobby, under the chandelier with its 6 arms dark again. The special bulbs had been for one night only, and Ani had not reordered them, and no one had asked her to. He told them plainly, the sale was final. He owned the land, the building, all of it. He would begin demolition in the spring. There would be 80 homes and ground floor retail, and he said it, and it landed in the lobby like a stone into still water. A 40-seat screening room on the ground level, which he would call the palace, with a plaque bearing their father's name, exactly as he had offered them all along, except that now it came to them as a gift rather than as a deal. And a gift is a smaller thing than a deal, because a deal you are a party to and a gift you merely receive. Renata took it strangely well, which frightened Ani more than tears would have. She did not rage and she did not collapse. She stood in the middle of the lobby and she said, "Well," and then she said, "You'll take care of it, won't you? You'll do it beautifully. You always were a careful boy." And she began almost at once to convert the catastrophe into a story she could carry. Ani watched her do it in real time, watched her build it as she spoke. The story in which she had given the palace to the neighborhood's own son, in which it was fitting and even poetic that little Dayan, whose father swept these floors, should be the one to carry it forward, in which the whole thing was less a loss than a passing of the torch. A beautiful ending, the right ending, an ending she had. In some sense she was already beginning to believe chosen. By the time she'd said it twice it had smoothed into something she could photograph. She would tell it this way for the rest of her life, and each telling would file down another edge, until eventually, years from now, she would half remember having arranged it, having decided, out of love, to hand the palace to the boy in the velvet seat. Leonid took it worse and better. He wept, and then he rallied into a terrible false brightness, and he announced that he had, in fact, several things in motion, a consulting opportunity, a friend with a business, a plan, and everyone let him have them, the way you let a man have his coat as he goes out into the cold, and no one asked what any of them were because there were none, and everyone knew there were none, and the not tasking was the last kindness the building had to give. Ra photographed it. Of course she did, but something had shifted in her over the 6 weeks, the video, the 4 million witnesses, the 61,000 real dollars from strangers, and then the auction, the 9 minutes, the folding table. She had learned at 17 the exact lesson her mother had spent a lifetime not learning, that the picture and the thing are not the same, that 4 million hearts is not a roof, that it looks so alive is a sentence about the picture and never about the building. She filmed the dark chandelier and she did not post it. She kept it. There is a difference, and she had found it, and it was the one clean thing to come out of the whole ruin. And then there was Felix. In all the arithmetic, in all 6 weeks of it, no one had done the arithmetic that included Felix. This is the truth of him, and it is the truth of every household like that one. He was so much a part of the building that no one thought of him as a person with a somewhere else to go, because he had no somewhere else. He had the booth. He had had the booth for 63 years. He was 81. And the question of where Felix would live when the palace came down was a question that everyone assumed someone else was holding. And no one was holding, because holding it meant looking at it, and this household did not look at things. On the last Sunday in the emptying lobby, someone said it was Leonid, distracted, kind, useless. Has anyone taken Felix to the home? The place, the Renata, did you arrange the place for Felix? And Renata said, I thought Ani, and Ani said, I gave you the brochure in March, you said you'd. And there was a silence, a specific silence, in which 4 people realized at once that the arrangement they had each assumed one of the others had made had, in fact, been made by no one, exactly like every other arrangement in the history of that building. And Felix was not in the lobby to hear it, because Felix was up in the booth, where he always was, where he had gone that morning out of 63 years of habit, and where Ani found him there an hour later when the others had gone. He had sat down in his chair beside the great cold projector, in his cardigan buttoned to the throat, to wait for a show that was not going to run, in a building that was already sold, and had, at some point in the quiet of the afternoon, with no one to hear him, and no one having thought to take him anywhere, simply and privately died. He was still warm when she found him. His hand was resting on the projector, on the housing, on the exact spot worn smooth and pale by 63 years of the same hand resting in the same place, and his face was not troubled. He had heard the double groan of the left door as the others left, the hinge that had needed oil for 11 years and now never would, and he had understood in the way he understood everything, only what he wanted to understand, which was that the house was empty and quiet and his, and that it was time, at last, for the last show, and that he did not need to go anywhere, because there was nowhere in the world he had ever needed to go. Ani sat with him in the booth until it was dark, which did not take long, because the marquee bulbs were off now, and the lobby light was off, and the chandelier was dark, and the only light in the whole 92-year-old building was the small red glow of the exit sign at the top of the iron stairs, the same red glow that had fallen, 40 years ago, on a man pushing a broom down a sloping aisle while his son watched from a seat too big for him. She did not photograph it. She had learned that too. Chapter 7. What stays? They tore it down in the spring, on a Tuesday, which is the day things get torn down, because no one is watching on a Tuesday. It did not take long. That was the last lesson the palace had to teach, and it taught it the way it had taught all the others, without malice, simply by being true. That a thing which takes 92 years to make takes about 9 days to unmake, and that most of the 9 days are paperwork and fencing and the disconnection of utilities, and the actual falling of it, the part a person might come to watch, the part that might mean something happens in an afternoon while everyone is at work. Dayan was there. He had told himself he would not be, and then he had known all along he would be, and he stood across the street behind the chain link with his hands in his pockets and watched the machine take the marquee first. The marquee went easily. The steel ribs that had held it out over the sidewalk for 92 years had rusted nearly through, and when the machine took hold of it, the whole curved thing came away almost gently, almost with relief, and the letters, the palace, chipped gold leaf on stone, came down with it. And the dead bulbs, the 400 of them, a third of them long dark, went into the same dumpster as the living ones, and there was no way from the street to tell which had been which. That was the thing Dayan could not stop looking at afterward. In the dumpster, you could not tell the dead bulbs from the ones that had still been burning. They were all just glass now. He had saved a few things. He had told his crew, and he had meant it, and it had mostly happened. They had taken out the chandelier before the machines came, all 6 dark arms and the working ones both, crated it, and it was in a warehouse now waiting for the day the small screening room would open on the ground floor of the 80 homes, where it would hang over 40 seats and be too large for the room, comically, sadly too large. A chandelier built for a cathedral hung in a chapel, and people would stand under it and say they don't build them like this anymore, and they would be right, and it would mean nothing. Because a chandelier is not the building, the same way a photograph is not the street, the same way 4 million hearts is not a roof. They had saved the door frame from the booth. Ani had asked for that specifically. The door frame with the pencil marks up the side where Felix had measured Renata every summer until she was 15, R and a date, climbing up the wood. Dayan had it cut out whole and given to Ani, and Ani had it and did not know what to do with it. A length of painted wood with a dead man's handwriting on it, too large to hang and too full to throw away, which is the exact size and weight of most of what anyone keeps. The plaque went up in the fall when the screening room opened. It bore the name of Dayan's father who had swept the floors, and below it, in smaller letters, a line about the palace, 1930 to 2024, and the words "a place where people came together in the dark." Renata came to the opening. She stood under the too large chandelier in the too small room and she cried. And she told everyone who would listen that she had given the palace to the neighborhood's own son, that it was the right ending, the fitting ending. And by now she believed it entirely. There was no seam left in the story at all. It had smoothed to something she could hold up like a photograph. And Dayan stood across the little room and watched her do it and did not correct her, because what would it have cost her to be corrected? And what would it have bought him? And he was done, finally, with putting prices on things. Here is what happened to them. Renata went back to Los Angeles, to a city where everything was new every 18 months, and she was, by all accounts, happier there than she had been in years. Because in a city that carries the past away as fast as it arrives, there is no orchard to lose, no palace to fail to save, no daily door you decline to walk through. There is only the conveyor belt, and it is restful in its way to stand on a thing that has already decided for you. She posted photographs of the palace sometimes, the old ones, 1961, the line around the block, and hundreds of people who had never stood inside it grieved it with her, and it was free, and she loved it. Leonid moved in with a cousin in another state and took a job that Ani never fully understood the nature of, and that did not last, and then another, and he was, in his letters, always on the verge of something, always with several things in motion. And he died 6 years later still believing that something was about to come along, which is not the worst way to die, and may even be, Ani sometimes thought, a kind of mercy, to go out still expecting the rescue, having never once had to learn that it does not come. Vera did not become a person who photographed things. She became, of all things, an accountant, which nobody predicted and which made perfect sense, because she had learned at 17 the single hardest lesson in the world, that the picture and the thing are not the same, that the number is the number and the number is real, and the feeling about the number is a separate object entirely, and she had learned it standing next to Ani in a county building on the 4th of the month, and she never unlearned it, and it kept her all her life from every trap that had taken her mother. And Ani kept the door frame. She could not hang it and she could not throw it away, so for years it stood in the corner of one apartment after another, a length of painted wood with a dead man's pencil marks climbing up it, R and a date, R and a date, and people who visited would ask what it was, and she would say, "It's from a building that isn't there anymore," and that would be all, because the rest of it did not fit into a sentence. The rest of it was a lobby that smelled of rancid butter and old carpet and film, and a chandelier with 6 dead arms, and 4 million people who loved a place they would never stand in, and a mother who would rather be robbed than choose, and a man who overpaid for a corpse because he had loved it as a boy, and an old man in a cardigan who died in a booth waiting for a last show because everyone had assumed someone else was holding him, and no one was, and none of that goes on a plaque. And none of it fits in a photograph, and none of it can be saved. And that is not a tragedy exactly, or it is exactly a tragedy, the ordinary kind, the kind that does not announce itself, the kind where nobody is a villain, and the thing is lost anyway quietly on a Tuesday, while everyone is at work. They built the 80 homes. Families live in them now. On the block, the coffee place does well, and the light rail runs, and the corner of Delmer and 8th is more alive than it has been in 40 years, genuinely alive. Not in a photograph, actual families spending actual money, children who will have their own 2 in the morning memories of the place. And Dayan was right about all of it, right in every particular. The block came alive exactly as he said it would. And it is not the palace. Both of those things are true. That is the whole story, and it was always the whole story. From the first morning when Renata walked in out of the light and said it hasn't changed, it's exactly the same, and meant it as praise. The block is more alive than ever, and the most beautiful building anyone on it had ever seen is gone. And the second thing did not have to happen for the first thing to happen. And it happened anyway, because no one who loved the building could bear to decide its future. And so its future was decided by people who did not love it, in 9 minutes, in a room with a dropped ceiling. And that is how it goes, most of the time, with orchards and palaces and everything else that takes 92 years to make. They don't build them like this anymore. They're right. The end.